Hi, this is Molly. For our first episode of Echo Ekoji, we're joined by Ken and Nori, two of the founding members of Ekoji Buddhist Temple. For our first episode, I wanted to start by having the two of you talk about some of the events that led to the founding of Ekoji.
I think in terms of the events that led to the founding of Ekoji, on a personal level, it was probably Greg and Maya being born. And, I had gone to school at AU here in Washington. And so we had contacts with the small Buddhist community that was already established. We started thinking about having a Dharma school because we had children now. And we were thinking, I grew up as a Buddhist, Nori grew up as a Buddhist, she's a PK, and we had children.
I'm sorry, she's a what?
Oh, preacher's kid.
Oh.
And so we wanted to have our kids raised as Buddhists. And we talk about interdependence and connectedness. And so like Nori's parents and my parents were active at Seabrook Buddhist Temple, and they were encouraging us to make sure our kids are raised in the Buddhist faith. And Reverend Suji was bishop at the time. And he was concerned about Buddhism on the East Coast. And there was the Eastern District, now the EBL. I had been active in the EBL when I was in high school and in college.
And just for our listeners who don't know, EBL is short for Eastern Buddhist League.
Right. It's composed of the temples east of the Mississippi, plus some temples in Eastern Canada. So there were leaders there. We had moved to D.C. and they were encouraging us. And so there were a lot of people involved that were saying, wouldn't it be nice? And Nori and I think that idea also resonated with us because we wanted to have our kids raised as Buddhists. So we contacted Buddhist families that I had known from college who I knew had kids, and we started from there. 5 families who had kids, plus Shin and his wife, who were older, and he came in almost as a consultant kind of thing, but he was, he sort of added gravitas and leadership to a bunch of young people. And me too, who she and Dick didn't have kids. They were involved and they're very supportive. They came out to everything. And me too, who used to write for the New York Times, she edited the Sangha first, and which became the Kalavinka. And so she was always writing things and helping us out there and giving us moral support. So there was a lot of interconnected forces that came together. And it started off with people who wanted to encourage Buddhism and encourage starting a Buddhist group in Washington, D.C. There was one already existing, but they were looking for something with kids. And then there were, at that time, young families who had kids. And we said, yeah, it'd be nice to raise them as Buddhists. And they all came together in 1978. That was a year of planning. Then we had our first service in 1979.
In January, yeah.
We have a lot of pictures of Reverend Suji. And I know that his remains are in our columbarium, our Nikotsudo. What role did he play?
He was Bishop of the Buddhist Churches of America at that time, right? He gave us a lot of support, unbelievable support for 7 families. There was already a small Buddhist Sangha under Reverend Honda. And then a bunch of us started a separate effort that focused on the Dharma school. And that had a lot of support from Reverend Suji. And when we got started, we got materials from all over, books and things. Seabrook contributed a lot of books. And the
Humpa Honganji of Hawaii, where my brother-in-law was minister at the time, their education department chair sent us materials because, the parents had to take on the role of the teachers. And most of us, had gone to Sunday school, but we weren't really, that knowledgeable about teaching. So then the parents had to study up in order to teach the kids.
And we had to do the Dharma talks because we didn't have a minister for this small group. And so we did the Dharma talks, we taught the classes, and everybody was very deeply involved and active in doing kinds of things to make it work. And we met twice a month. No,
I thought, do we meet twice a month or every Sunday?
no
Yeah.
we met twice a month.
At each other's homes initially.
Yeah, we had support from other temples, and a lot of those Reverend Susie's pushing. And if I needed help, I could call him, and he would actually pick up the phone and talk to me, kind of thing. My parents had known him from way back. I could use those ties. Just to give you an example, they had at that time, every year they had a BCA minister who went around to the various districts and gave Dharma talks.
Yeah, you need to tell them who, the BCA had
Yeah,
ministers?
the BCA, the Buddhist Church of America, BCA had roving ministers. Once a year they'd go around the country, go to various temples, hit every district, and give Dharma talks. Well, Reverend Sushi made sure that Ekoji was one of the stops that the minister came to.
Does BCA still do that?
No.
I don't think so. But so like he might go to a big temple, big in Eastern terms, like the Midwest Temple in Chicago. And then he would come to the 7 families in Washington, D.C. And he had, and then another example of the support that Reverend Sushi gave us was at that time the Gomonshu,
Koshin, huh?
Botani. He had just become the Gomonshu, and he was making a tour. Reverend Sushi called me and said, I'm going to bring the Gomonshu to Washington. And you set this up. And I'm going, you're going to do what? We got 7 families here, and we can't afford it. And he said, don't worry about the costs. BCA will take care of it. You find us a place to meet, and you rent a car, and we'll take care of everything else.
For our non Shin Buddhist listeners, can you describe the position of Gomonshu?
He is equivalent to the Pope in the Catholic faith. He is head of the worldwide Jodo Shin Buddhist movement, and it's
direct descendant of Shinran.
Yeah, he's a direct descendant of the founder of our sect.
And the current Gomonshu is the son or the grandson now of the Gomonshu then?
He is the son.
The son. Okay.
The current one is the son of the Gomonshu that came. So the one who came is now called the Zen one. Huh?
Yeah. I think this was in 1979. That
or 1980.
So 79 or 80.
Yeah. And so this was a big deal. I mean, like if you could imagine the Pope going to a small church.
7 family church.
Not even a church. We didn't have a church.
Yeah. So we rented the K Spiritual Life Center at AU.
You have to use American University.
At American University, and that was where we had the service. We invited participants from Seabrook and New York because the Gomonshu didn't go there. He came to us instead. and so we had the kyoshiki, the affirmation service that we held with when the bishop comes to Ekoji. We held in the case when the Gomonshu does it, it's called a kyoshiki. And so Greg and Maya had their affirmation service with the Gomonshu.
Wow.
Yeah. And they were like
the K Spiritual Center. Yeah, there was a lot of people from New York and Seabrook.
Yeah.
Getting their affirmations and their rights there too, and so it was quite a turnout because there was a busload from Seabrook, and I think another busload from New York who came for this.
Yeah.
And how old were Greg and Maya when?
They were like 4 and 5.
No, they were only like 3 or 4. Yeah, they were, because we had to carry them. We had to carry them up. And, yeah.
We had this picture of Maya and the Gamonchu sitting next to each other, and she's sort of looking at them.
She's got this,
Is he in the full robes and?
Oh, and that one he was still in his suit before he,
Yeah.
Okay.
before he changed.
Because I was thinking that would be very distracting for a little kid.
Talking about how different it was, because we were a small group, we had reception for the Gamonchu and his entourage at Shig's house in his basement, and we had, which was in Newington, and we had a reception afterwards at
yeah, we had Miyashiro's house in
Yeah.
DC, and the bus from C, and they live in DC, and it's a that the roads are not that wide and everything, and I have no idea how that bus driver maneuvered that bus into that neighborhood, but it was just amazing to me, because there was a whole busload of people from Seabrook there, and I think the New York people had already left, and our members, and we all cooked different dishes.
Yeah, it was potluck. It was not like where we catered, right? Because we couldn't afford to cater.
So that's where our potluck tradition started.
So the Gamonchu, it was a totally different experience for him, where he, in terms of the receptions and the dinners and stuff like that. But it was,
he felt most at home though.
yeah, but it was like that sort of this kind of support that Reverend Tucci gave us, even as we were starting a Dharma school. And like I said, if we had a question, he'd pick up the phone, or if he wanted to, find out something, he wouldn't tell his assistant, give us a call. He'd pick up the phone, and he'd go, and they'd pick up the phone ringing. I go, hello, and he goes, this is for Bishop Tucci, and I go, oh, hello, Bishop. And so later on, we did the Dharma school we started in 79, and by 81 we had become Ekoji. And later on, when Reverend Tsuji was getting ready to retire from being bishop, and he had talked to Mr. Numata about starting a temple here in Washington D.C., in the Washington D.C. area, he gave Shig a call, and Shig called Norman and I, and Shig said he wants to take us to. He's coming to Washington. He wants to take us to dinner, and I go, uh-oh, what you want to talk about? And Shig goes, beats the heck out of me. He wants to meet with the three of us, and so. It's like a February, it's kind of in the wintertime, in about 1980 or so. And that's when he first pitched the idea of having a temple here in Washington.
And okay, you can imagine the three of them were like, dumbstruck.
Yeah,
we were a small group.
Yeah, we were, we were a really small group, and he would say, and then he said, you'd have a resident minister, and we were at a fancy restaurant, so you couldn't really choke on your food or anything like that. And we talked about it. He said, I told one of us said we can't afford it. What 7 families that are, a lot of us are just getting started on our careers. And he said, don't worry about the cost. And he said, do you think you guys would be interested? Basically said, you guys would be interested? And none of us committed right at the start. And we said, let's just go back and talk to the group. And we talked, and there was this, how are we going to do this? And how are we going, what's it mean? And stuff like that we talked about, because it was It was,
Jump into the lake.
yeah, it was a really big effort that we're talking about. And the group said, yeah, let's give it a try. And so I called the bishop up and said, we're on board. And he said, good. And then, so in, it must have been 81, because he came out in July with Miss Tucci. And by August or September, we had our
First service in August.
our first service, not a dedication service, but our first service. And things moved very quickly. Once we said we're in, he and Shig did a lot of the legal work, and they drove around. They found a parsonage. They found a place for us to meet, bought the furniture and all that stuff, and like kibbutz and the members of the. We had gotten from beyond 7 families to maybe
9.
a dozen, maybe, around there. We were growing, but we were still really small. And so I was supposed to help communicate and pull everybody's ideas together. And we sort of geared up that way on the human side of it. And Shig and then Reverend Tucci, not Bishop, took care of the legal and all the infrastructure kinds of things. And
we were lucky that Mrs. Suji was here by then with him, and she was the really, what we say, better half. Well, not that well.
Yeah,
they're equally important.
Yeah, and sometimes I used to compare how we say Amida Buddha is personified by the idea of wisdom and compassion. I always saw Reverend Suji the wisdom side of it. Mrs. Suji was the compassion side of it. So they made a good combination.
Yeah, she was like a second parent to, second mother to so many of us.
Yeah, so many of the kids who were growing up.
And she was like a grandmother to them all.
And so they, and so the Tujis were very much involved in us getting started, both as a Dharma school and as a temple. And then how Reverend Tucci, in my opinion, he gave a direction to the temple where he felt that, we've often said that he would say, come as you are, before come as you are was a phrase. He always would say that Buddhism is not just for Japanese Americans or Asians. It's got truths that speak to everybody. And so the door has to be open for everybody. And I remember one time, just his idea of the door we had a huge snowstorm when we were just starting. And I called him, and I think I was president at the time, and I called him up and I said, we're canceling temple, right? And he'd go, no. And I said, nobody could get there. And he said, what if somebody comes? And so, I knew he was going to go, so I felt guilty. And I went. And when I got to, at that time, we were at the condominium on Oak Keene Mill. And I found he and Mr. Tsuji had shoveled the steps and shoveled out part of the parking lot so that people could put their cars there, just in case somebody came. Nobody came. Snow was too deep. But he said, just in case. And so, he provided that kind of direction. And I remember, when we were starting off, and I had a discussion with him about how often we're going to hold Dharma school. Because we had been meeting every other week, or twice a month, I guess. And he would say every week, and I'd go every week, and I said, and that's all the families, both parents are working, and people have chores and stuff like that they do both on Saturdays and Sundays, and he goes every week, and I go, oh.
Oh, okay.
So next time we met, I met with the parents, and I said, Reverend Susie says we're going to do this every week, and they go every week, and I say every week, and so that's how that was part of his direction. He wanted to make sure that there was actual content and actual teaching going on, which made it really hard on us because, like Nori said, we grew up in Dharma schools, but to actually say we're going to talk about the Dharma,
Yeah.
and at the various levels, because we had, even in the beginning, we had divided into 4 classes, by age group. And
But the whole gist of it was that, because our kids would likely be the only Buddhists in their school or in their class, he wanted the Dharma school teachings.
he wanted to make sure the kids had a firm foundation in their religion and the perspectives, and so that's why he wanted to, and he truly believed that Dharma had truths that needed to be shared, and sometimes it gets lost in the arts and crafts.
Mm-hmm. Well, it can be taught along, with the teachings, but you want the teachings, the real meat of the matter, to be the focus.
And so, he had a lot of influence, really a lot of influence in the beginnings. I remember, and I've used it before, where he would say that he thinks of himself as a farmer in minister's robes, and he looks at the Sangha, and he sees people dressed as housewives and children and office workers and professional people and technicians and skilled labor. He sees them dressed that way, but in actuality, they're ministers prepared to teach us if we listen. And so, these kinds of themes that he started off with, I think, helped set, and for us who knew him personally, and who were, like Norman and the Nagatanis and the Motonagas and the families who were there from, if not from the very beginning, from early on. And he helped set that direction. And the question is, I think, if he were still alive and looked out at the Sangha now and see how diverse it really is, he would think, not bad.
Well, and I think looking at our Sangha, it is very diverse. I mean, it's a nice group of people from all over the place.
It really is. And, the fact, the crossing over seminar workshop that we held sort of several years ago sort of helped indicate that. And, what was interesting, we had that monthly discussion group about movies. And I think I'm the only one there who grew up as a Buddhist in that discussion group. And so we talked about this movie, Hector and the Search for Happiness, last week. And the As I started off, I thought this is going to be a waste of time, but it turned out to be a great movie. It started off silly, and the discussion was really interesting. And what it does is that, and there was a person in the group who said that it wasn't until that she grew up Christian, but it wasn't until Ekoji that she started thinking about interdependence and impermanence and suffering the role of the ego and stuff like that, and ideas of contentment versus happiness and gratitude, and those are like a lot of the things that the temple tries to talk about. And at a previous one, I think we had watched the Japanese film Departures, and one of the members in the discussion said that she had a hard time dealing with the idea of death. And she had, since coming to the temple, she'd become more comfortable with the idea. And because it's not just death that we talk about, it's both the death plus the idea of oneness with the Amida. That it becomes almost simultaneous. And once you get past that, once you've gone through the idea of death, then you can deal with the world better, I think. When you wrote that piece on pandemic, as reassurance, I thought that was great. And this is, I guess, so that's why I think when Reverend Suji looks out at, if he were to look out at us, he would say not bad. In his own way, I think we're trying to do what he wanted Ekoji to be, a place for everybody, a place that talks about the Dharma, and there he is.
Really excited to have both of you here for this question, because my next question was, how do you think, because you mentioned you are both lifelong Buddhists, how do you think that affected your decisions when you were raising your kids, Greg and Maya?
The Buddhist that I am now and the Buddhist that I was when the kids were born and as they were growing up, it's evolved and continues to evolve. They say you can never step in the same stream twice. The way I would raise the kids now as opposed to when we were actually in the process of doing it is probably different.
I think that's probably true for most people.
And so, for instance, I had this view of Reverend Suji as being very wise and unruffled and stuff like that. But he talked to his daughters, and they would talk about going on these road trips, and they'd be making noise and fighting like that. And they had 4 kids at the time.
They had 4 daughters, yeah.
And he said, they would say, and you had to watch out because all of a sudden my father's arm would swing back and try to hit us as we were driving. And so, that doesn't fit the image that we have as he was resident minister of the temple or as Buddhist, as the bishop. But so as he evolved, we were also evolving. And but I think there's certain things we made sure that we did Gasho before meals and we talked about it because of
This is actually a great chance. Do you want to describe Gasho for me?
Oh,
I don't have to.
It's an expression of gratitude before you eat, and where you put your hands together and you say Namo Amida Butsu. It's an expression of gratitude in many ways.
But not only for mealtime.
Yeah.
It's for, whenever whenever we receive a gift, we put it on the butsudan, and we just express thanks, gratitude for that. Whenever in 2019 was a really hard year for us because we lost so many of our friends, and every time we got word of that, we put our hands together in gasho to thank them for for the life that they shared with us. So gasho is
It's a thank you.
it's a way of saying thank you.
It's just expression of gratitude. And so this became part of the kids growing up, so that they would see this. But we started off our meals this way. As Nori points out, we've always had a butsudan, and a family altar. Would They would spend a week or two with staying at Nori's parents' house. Their house and my parents' house are next door to each other. There was a huge field in between.
This was in New Jersey.
Yeah.
where Ken was born and grew up in.
And
So did that happen? Wait.
Oh, let me explain this.
Were you guys next door neighbors?
No.
Well,
Actually, his mom and dad relocated to New Jersey after leaving the camps, the Japanese relocation camps in Arkansas, and so they were there since 1946. 44. 44?
Mm-hmm.
45. Yeah. And my father was a Buddhist minister in the U.S. from 1930 until after the war, when he took the family to Japan. Then he went to Hawaii as a minister. He retired, and then he was asked to become a minister in Seabrook. So my father went to Seabrook in 1971, and when Ken's father was president of the temple. But in any event, so that they were living next to each other then at the time when our kids were born. And that's how they were.
Yeah.
Did I say that too fast?
PKs. One of you is a preacher's kid, and one of you is a president's kid.
And so
they would spend like a week at a time. Yeah, Greg and Maya would spend like a week at a time at my parents' house. And my mother really, she had a lot of, I'm the youngest of 6, so obviously there's a lot of other kids, but we were the closest to them. So she really enjoyed having the kids with them.
Yeah, and so as Buddhist priests do, Nori's father would start each day and end each night before their butsudan, their family altar, and he would chant the sutra. And when the kids
did he chant the same sutra?
Generally the Jusei.
Yeah, he would chant the Jusei, yeah.
And then, so when he would do this, and the kids were up in New Jersey with them for the week or two,
they'd sit on his lap and
they'd sit on his lap, and so by the time, after a couple of years of going through this, they knew the Jusei by heart, and so what was amazing was, one time we had taken them to, anyway, we ended up in California where my parents came from, and we went to the cemetery where my grandparents and my uncles, aunts, and there were family there. And Reverend Watanabe was?
Reverend Taniguchi.
Reverend Taniguchi?
Yeah, Reverend Taniguchi was a minister then.
In Fowler. And so he joined us at the cemetery. And we chanted the sutra. And so the kids were chanting the sutra all along with them by memory. And he sort of looks at them and goes, huh?
What's that coming out of their mouth?
And so, these kinds of things as you're growing up, you don't, when you talk about, when they're young, you don't talk about the role of the ego, but sometimes that it happens. You explain a different perspective or another perspective, or you try to emphasize compassion or interdependence, not as a set topic, but as just as part of the experience that they're going through. I remember we used to watch.
What was that teenage movie? The teenage
Oh,
series?
my and I would sit and watch 90210. Was that the one?
I think so. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We would watch that together, and we'd talk about what's going on. And I'm not sure it was from my perspective, but that perspective was probably shaped by Buddhism. Or what was it? At one time we watched, we flew. It had been a rough. I worked for the Congress, and it had been a rough session. And I told Nori, we got to get out of here for a while. So it was January, and we flew to San Diego. And we went, and on the plane, they showed the bridges in Madison County. Because I remember this first incident, and we were sitting at the hotel, and we're talking about the movie. And I said, Greg, how come you didn't watch it? And he said, I know the story. I read the book or something. He was aware of what it was all about. And I said, you're kidding. And he said, no. And they started talking. So we started talking about it. Mostly Greg and Maya started talking about it. And there was a question of individual responsibility versus your responsibility to the family. Because you remember who was the mother?
Meryl Streep.
Meryl Streep, who had the central role, and it was a question: was she going to go away with
What was that? Was it Clint Eastwood?
Or somebody?
Yeah.
Or stay with the family? And so, so we were at this table, eating breakfast and talking about this topic, or they were arguing about this topic because they took into different sides.
Of course.
and all of a sudden I noticed it became very quiet, and everybody else sitting around us were listening to this discussion between these two college kids. And I look and I noticed how quiet it is, and I suggested maybe we ought to talk about something else.
But there was a common occurrence at the dinner table. Yeah, there would be, it was a free for all. But then, because Ken and Greg would go ahead, and Maya would have to raise her hands. I want to say something. I want to say.
And if you can imagine Maya having to do that, her feeling that she would have to. But so discussion was very common. I think the first time Brent, before he and Maya were married, had dinner with us, and we went into our usual bickering and arguing, and he felt he had to come to Maya's defense, saying she just had a hard day, give her a break. And we all looked at him like, what's wrong with you? And Maya looked at him and said, yeah, what's wrong with you?
And yet he's still around.
Yeah. And so there was a lot of open discussion. How much of it was shaped by the Buddhism? And it was probably a lot, but it was a Buddhism that was evolving in all of us. So from like I said, the Buddhism that we were talking about when they were in college, and the Buddhism that we were talking about, or just showing when they were in early elementary school, when we were starting the Dharma school, was a lot different. And a lot of my evolution came not just from the ministers, but from working with the kids and having to teach Dharma school. And usually I had the high school kids, or the older kids, the oldest group. And that was fascinating because they were all really bright, and it was challenging. And sometimes you would stay up till 3 or 4 o'clock on Saturday just so you can try to stay one step ahead of the kids as they were taught on a subject that we were getting ready to explore, because there was things you just had to learn yourself before you can talk about it. And when you talked about it, you weren't quite sure that you got it right, but you were hoping. But so over a long period of time, I evolved, and my Buddhism evolved, and it took the help of like Molly, people like you, and a lot of people in our Sangha that would give me feedback or help me understand things. There was one time I had a discussion with Art. We were just talking with Art, and he said, it's really amazing how introspective Shin Buddhism asks you to be. And it had never occurred to me until he actually put it into words. About, yeah, he's right. It does. How do you get to an entrusting heart until you actually start to look at yourself and what you can do and can't do? So we say you take refuge in the Sangha, and that's part of it. The support that you get, the lessons that you learn, and even in the Sanghas, not just the adults, but it's the kids. I remember when I was teaching, and I've told this story before, that when I was teaching Dharma school, I had a young lady, and I was saying something, I forget what we were talking about. She slaps her hand on the table and goes, "That's a bunch of crap." And I go, "What?" She was nice. She was just saying what I was saying was a bunch of crap, not that I was crap, And so we talked.
Okay.
And that was helpful to me.
Did you mentioned earlier that Maya and Greg were probably some of the only Buddhist kids in their school. Did that ever worry you at all? Did you worry about kind of the feedback that they got from the outside world about being Buddhist?
On that subject, Maya's class in social studies or something. She was in English. This was when she was at Lake Braddock, and they were talking about the Lord's Prayer, and obviously Maya didn't know the Lord's Prayer because she had never been to to a Christian church. But anyway, so then the teacher said, who doesn't know the Lord's Prayer? Everybody knows that, but Maya didn't, and so.
It was when Edward Bennett was Secretary of Education, and he came out with his list of common knowledge for the American culture, and it included the Lord's Prayer and a bunch of other things. So the teacher, Maya, felt very embarrassed because she didn't know what the Lord's Prayer was.
And I guess the teacher kind of ridiculed her for it too.
Well, she didn't ridicule her, but she was kind of dumbfounded that it wasn't part of the common culture for her. And so she came home.
And so talked about it at dinner time.
Yeah. So I called the teacher the next day. And we talked, and the teacher said, it's part of common. She's surprised that Maya never ran into it. They start junior JC meetings with the Lord's Prayer. And I said, I don't think she's ever been to a JC meeting. And
what's a JC meeting?
Junior Chamber of Commerce.
Oh, okay.
and so we talked about it for a while, and so the next day the teacher called Maya up and apologized to her for what had transpired, and which embarrassed Maya a second time. But there was another experience also to the question that you asked. Because we had the Dharma school, so there was the group of, well, maybe half a dozen kids were in my class. So, Kara and Neil Motonaga and Greg and Maya and Brian Nagatani and
Janet Tanaka.
yeah, Janet and Karen Tanaka, and so they would talk to each other, and had become very close friends and still are. But I remember one time one of the kids went to the group and they said, somebody in my class said I was going to go to hell because I didn't believe in Jesus Christ and God. And the other kids go, yeah, I've had that too. And they laughed about it and they talked about it. And in that sense, they gave each other this emotional support that they felt free enough to talk to each other about it and share their experiences. And they had their own coping ways. So I think that at Lake Braddock, it's got 6,000-7,000 kids.
Big school, 7 to 12, yeah.
And there are probably 4 to 6 Japanese American kids in the group
At that time.
And so they were a minority, and as Buddhists, they were even more of a minority. But they were able to they handled it well, and I think the support that they got from their friends at Dharma school and going through that experience, and probably the teachings, hopefully the teachings that help give them support.
Thank you to Ken and Nori for sharing their experiences with us. And thank you to our listeners. We hope that you join us for episode 2.